I become the president. And some members of Congress said, no, you don't. You're only an acting president. And John Quincy Adams, the former president, said, you're only an acting president. And what do you mean by that? Well, you had a possibility of a new election, in terms of a new presidential election. And some members of Congress at the time said, what happens in the case of inability? If you don't, if on succession, we have 4 contingencies in the Constitution. One is inability of a president, and the other 2, of course, you have resignation and removal after an impeachment. So this is the distinction. You have a permanent vacancy when the president dies. When your president is unable, you don't, and therefore you got to acknowledge and deal with that.
So,
I mean, that was the stream of history, really, after the time of succession.
So with Section 3, and I'll quote this one too, whenever the President transmits to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and until he transmits to them a written declaration to the contrary, such powers and duties shall be discharged by the Vice President as acting President. Now, if I'm not mistaken, that's the most frequent use of the amendment since its adoption, I think 6 times in total. When do we typically see Section 3 invoked?
One example would be if a president was going in for surgery and would be administered sort of pain medicine where he would be unconscious during the surgery. It was important that there be no doubt about where the executive power was at that point. The president is unconscious in the surgery, and therefore one should make it clear to the world who the president, who has that presidential power, the vice president under the Constitution. So, and then Eisenhower mentions the possibility of what happens if a plane that a president was in crashed and you couldn't find the president. How would we deal with executive power? And that would be considered an inability under Section 3.
And so, we're racing through these things in the interest of time, but Section 4 gets to what happens if the cabinet and the vice president essentially agree that the president is incapable of performing. The question that I want to ask, though, goes back to the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan. So he underwent extensive surgery. Did he have an opportunity to sign a memo saying the vice president is going to be the acting president? I remember Secretary of State Al Haig saying, I'm in charge, and there was a little bit of a controversy around who actually had executive authority while the president was under anesthesia.
Yeah, he was not able to, obviously in the circumstances, I think that was in 1981, he was not able to function in writing out a declaration. He needed a surgery right away, but Vice President and the majority of the heads of the executive departments that had the power under Section 4, they didn't act. They should have acted, in my opinion, but they didn't act. And it was a subject that was discussed in a cabinet meeting, and it also was discussed at the hospital by 3 of the close aides of President Reagan, that they weren't going to recommend that it be used. So it just didn't get used. I think history looks back and indicates with the 25th Amendment now more clearly understood that it should have been used at that time because of his health.
So Dean Furyk, we've got literally about a minute left here. I'm curious, with the benefit of the 60+ years that the amendment has been around, what are there any lingering space? Is there any lingering issues that can still be addressed and improved upon from the text of the amendment as it was drafted in the early 1960s?
There have been efforts to put forth proposals to deal with such subjects of a dual disability of a president and vice president, that they're both disabled at the same time. The 25th Amendment and inability provisions don't work, and how to deal with that. And then if a vice president was chosen as an acting president being disabled, and he or her had a disability as an acting president, how do you deal with that? Since sections 3 and 4 require a role by others than by others who include the vice president. So without the vice president, you have these contingencies. There have been a number of recommendations that have been made to deal with that, if possible, by legislation. And students at Fordham Law School have twice had clinics, law school clinics, where recommendations to deal with that kind of subject were made. And Senator Birch Bayh participated in a sense with respect to those studies, because he was still alive, and I asked him to have some words for the students, and he did.
Well, Dean John Furick, thank you so much for your service and for sharing some of that history with us today. That is all.